One of his previous maids has exposed the magnificent Prince Charming, who brags about his manners in public. He is now seen by everyone as a corrupt, affluent son of a king. To find out what Prince Andrew's former maid disclosed about him and why, watch this video through to the conclusion. Everything makes clear now. He didn't turn into a monstrous creature. He was always a bad guy. One individual who aspired to work for the royal family was Charlotte Briggs. She also used to believe that people would always turn out well if they were loved. This time, however, she was mistaken. Charlotte didn't understand that occasionally situations can be so poisonous that a snake egg will only spew forth a snake, regardless of how carefully you care for it. That's what transpired with Prince Andrew. When she first entered Prince Andrew's realm, she was just 21 years old. Despite the promise of royal service and the glitz of palace halls, she ended up describing her job as the one that no one wanted. The explanation was straightforward. A man who was publicly referred to be arrogant by his own staff, rather than the lovely Duke of York that the public had formerly assumed, resided behind the gleaming walls of Buckingham Palace, impolite and insane. She didn't spend any time in one of her interviews with the Daily Mail. She expressed all of her thoughts regarding Andrew. "I could care less about Prince Andrew's feelings. He's a cruel, awful man." She wasn't trying to soften her words with that terminology. For someone who had suffered years of humiliating treatment, it was the most honest testimony. As her tales proliferated, the public at last got an unvarnished look at Andrew's true behavior away from the cameras. Her first impressions of the Duke were that he was entitled, indolent, and easily angered. According to her, Andrew frequently yelled commands for things he could have completed on his own. One of his interests became curtains. Instead, Briggs was in charge of heavy floor-to-ceiling draperies that he could simply draw with his own hand. If the mistake could be termed a mistake, it released a tantrum the moment she left even the slightest space between them. Andrew roared out of his office, his voice resonating with obscenities as he shouted down the hallway. When he brought the young maid to tears, he yelled, "Can't you bloody do anything right?" It provided insight into the electricity system that employees had to deal with on a regular basis. Errors, no matter how minor, were not accepted in Andrew's home. The weight of punishment was attached to every action. Briggs remembered the continual anxiety of being observed as he moved around rooms. "I tried everything to stay away from him," she said. "He was erratic. He was much more irate." She was unnerved by more than just his rage, though. It was his peculiar demands, so humiliating and compulsive that they almost seemed ludicrous. His collection of stuffed animals was the subject of the most notorious. To outsiders, it appeared to be a grown guy holding on to his boyhood, a cute little quirk. It was a nightmare for those who had to keep it up. The Duke of York insisted that they were placed with military accuracy and maintained 72 teddy bears in addition to a plush hippo and black panther. Nobody touched them unsupervised. His two beloved bears should always sit on either side of his bed like sentinels. And laminated instruction sheets explained which toy should be at the front and which should be at the back. Briggs recounted being trained on this practice by itself for a full day. A mistake might set off one of Andrew's notorious outbursts. In fact, his bedroom was a temple to his own frailty. After the mattress was rotated, the pillows with the royal crest embroidery needed to be precisely centered. He was to lay out his jammies in perfect symmetry. Once on display, the stuffed animals were to be taken down before bed and brought back in the morning. Briggs and other staff members frequently questioned what kind of man required this treatment and what it spoke about him. This was not a slow story for the press. Later, it took advantage of these tales to depict a grown prince who was stuck in a developmental stall and needed young maids to calm him down and preserve the teddy bear's holiness. But it was no laughing matter to Briggs. She compared it to having to tread carefully every day. The charm he tried to project in public clashed dramatically with the image of a monarch who sobbed like a child over drapes and bears. His relationships with other servants were far worse. In contrast to Charles, Edward, and even Prince Philip, whom Briggs recalled as being dignified and gentlemanly, he treated palace employees like garbage with little appreciation or civility. Andrew was a unique example of brutality. She wasn't quite removing these tails from her hair. Similar information was disclosed by other former employees. In order to remind her of her position, one ex-wife recalls having to hurry across the room to close curtains that Andrew was standing right next to. Another characterized his condescension and coldness in the most basic interactions. The needlessness of these revelations, however, was what made them even more painful. The obligations of Andrew's siblings did not weigh on him. He was not going to be a king. He wanted worship from those below him, even though his job was indulgent at worst and ceremonial at best. Charlotte Briggs's revelation went beyond a man with a short fuse or silly eccentricities. It had to do with a pattern. A man who enjoyed making others feel inferior, who viewed service as submission rather than help, and who fostered an atmosphere so poisonous that it was impossible to work in the palace. And this was just the start. Well, no. This was just the start. Even Charlotte recognized something about Andrew. And at a very young age, it all began. Andrew's personality was different from his brother's from the start, and not in a good way. Andrew appeared to represent something far less innocent than Anne's stubbornness and ability, and Charles's quietness and bookishness. Palace employees and royal observers observed a pattern of cruelty in his games even as a young child. He demanded attention rather than merely wanting it, and he frequently got it by insulting and torturing others who were unable to defend themselves. Baiting the stony-faced guards of the Queen was one of his first pastimes. Andrew walked past them, making fun of their stiff stance and pulling faces to shatter their confidence at a time when most kids would have shied away from their scary presence. He became more irate and escalated his antics to get them to acknowledge him when they didn't respond. This wickedness was not innocuous. The child thought that he was exempt from all regulations, including the tacit rules enforced by the guys who guarded his family. But when he wasn't against people, that's when the true brutality was displayed. The burden of his rotten anger also fell on animals. According to historical accounts, he would kick the family dogs, laugh when they yelled, and use sticks to strike the legs of horses for his own entertainment. The royal grooms were so appalled by the behavior that they decided to take matters into their own hands one day. They grabbed the little prince, buried him in the dirt he had so enjoyed spreading to others, and pushed him headfirst into a heap of horse excrement. Although that was a horrific penalty, they obviously believed he deserved it. Staff also deviated from royal decorum to correct him on other occasions. Another time, he incited a palace footman to react when he continued to harass him. In the end, he struck the youngster so forcefully that he suffered a black eye. The footman resigned, expecting to be fired right away, but the Queen rejected his offer. Even she appeared to understand that Andrew's actions had devolved into such heinousness that punishment was warranted, even if it came from one of her own servants. He wasn't just nasty to employees or animals. With Edward, his younger brother, Andrew made every conversation a competition. He publicly harassed him, pushing him, stealing cakes, and leaving him bruised. It was not horseplay between brothers, it was dominance. To those who witnessed it, it showed a boy drunk on the rush of dominance who was constantly trying to prove he was in charge. His notoriety followed him like a foul stink to school. His classmates at prep and Gordontown called him the Snigger for his cruel laughter at other people's expense and Baby Grumpling for his outbursts. Some had hoped for a pleasant royal, but he wasn't it. He was the brat, spoiled, arrogant, and often making fun of others. His mindset didn't change as he got older. It only got harder. At palace parties, there were rumors that he would tug at the gowns and zippers of female employees, forcing their faces into meals while mockingly ordering them to smell the partate. It was not a prince's demeanor, but that of a bully. He was known to destroy other people's shelters when they were camping by tearing fly sheets down and throwing them into rivers, leaving his friends wet and unpleasant. It was just another joke to Andrew. It was a humiliating experience for those who endured it. It was best summed up by his subordinates. He didn't talk with the royal child's customary politeness. Instead, he flung items to the ground and yelled foul commands saying, pick that up. The boy's behavior was alarming to staff used to discipline, control, and dignity. They perceived him as a miniature version of a pampered ruler rather than a mischievous child. Andrew's reputation had already been established within the royal walls by the time he was old enough to don a uniform. He was neither the tough but competent Anne nor the handsome heir like Charles. The staff disliked dealing with him. They referred to the child as insufferable. A boy whose sense of respect was dominance, whose sense of pleasure was brutality, and whose conceit appeared to only get stronger with age. They hoped that he would get over it. Unfortunately, however, things continued to deteriorate. Andrew's public persona was already beginning to falter by the late 1990s. Rumors of fury were no longer the only aspect of the controversies. It had to do with women, money, and an ineptitude that was now unmistakable. As his brother Charles pretended to change following Diana's passing, Andrew continued to engage in actions that would permanently disgrace him. His financial connections were among the first to break. His careless economic endeavors clashed with his extravagant spending, which was driven by the benefits of his royal status. He was rumored to have struck deals with dubious people, frequently those who were being investigated overseas. The majority of these stories were discreetly buried by the royals, but rumors of money for access scams followed him around. Allegations that Andrew was monetizing his royal title by setting up meetings with business people in exchange for substantial sums of money swiftly developed from what started out as modest favors for friends. The paper trail continued to emerge despite the palace's denials. His infatuation with younger ladies accompanied the money. Andrew seems unable to get over the idea of a middle-aged man pursuing ladies half his age after divorcing Sarah Ferguson. He showed off his relationships with thousands of socialites and models, many of whom were just out of their teens. According to his driver, he used to witness nearly 10 women entering and leaving his Bangkok apartment. It was unsettling in addition to being embarrassing for the family. He was publicly referred to by journalists as Randy Andy, a moniker that persisted for decades and turned the Queen's son into a tabloid joke. Aides murmured about his incapacity to keep himself away from unsuitable company, even inside the palace. His notorious association with Jeffrey Epstein followed. Andrew was seen at his private jet, his Caribbean estate, and his New York residences long before Epstein was arrested. Epstein has never been able to respond to the questions raised by pictures of him strolling with him following his initial jail term. The association wasn't the only issue. It was his audacity. Other strong men backed off, but Andrew stepped up, insisting he had no regrets about their relationship and referring to Epstein as a devoted friend. Later, that one choice would destroy him. But there were other shadows over him besides Epstein. Employees were creating their own confidential list of complaints behind the royal walls. Maids protested that they were not treated like employees in a modern home, but rather like servants in a medieval court. In order to close curtains just inches from where he was standing, Andrew made one maid run up 7 flights of stairs. The abuse, according to her, was verbal, constant, humiliating, and intended to shatter them. Another remembered him yelling at someone for making a small error with his teddy bears, saying that only he was permitted to handle them. In secret, some started referring to him as the Prince of Darkness because of his infamous treatment of the Queen's staff. Andrew denigrated people in addition to giving directives. He was reprimanded by gardeners for having leaves that weren't in their proper places. Drivers claimed that if a car was 5 minutes late, he would yell. Working for Andrew was like being a human punching bag, according to one former equerry. Buried for years, these testimonies gradually made their way into the media, each one presenting a more sinister image than the one before. During his international travels, the public witnessed glimmers of this entitlement. His job as Britain's trade ambassador was to represent the nation with honor. Rather, he was reported to have reprimanded foreign employees, shown disdain for servers, and demanded accommodations that were more akin to those of dictators than diplomats. He allegedly made a hotel employee cry by yelling over the temperature of his suite during one event in the Middle East. It became part of the job to clean up Andrew's outbursts. Diplomats who accompanied him acknowledged. Disgust was only heightened by his private life. The two appeared to be stuck in a toxic symbiotic relationship following Sarah Ferguson's own scandals, such as being discovered to have accepted cash in exchange for introductions to Andrew. Separated but not divorced, they cohabitated and continued to enjoy the benefits of royal life despite the disgrace they caused to the kingdom. They were criticized for engaging in actions that would have ruined regular reputations while abusing their titles as a shield. Andrew had gone into a downward spiral by the early 2000s. He wasn't tolerated like Edward, revered like Charles, or even admired like Anne. They made fun of him. When it was discovered how frequently he misused taxpayer funds on private planes and helicopters for pointless trips, his moniker changed from Randy Andy to Air Miles Andy. The picture was damning once more. A wealthy man who was unaware of how out of touch he appeared in a Britain beset by economic inequality. More palace insiders broke their silence each year. They portrayed a man who was completely self-obsessed, wanting to be seen with celebrities, and status-obsessed. He was an outcast even at family get-togethers because of his conceit. According to reports, Princess Diana once said that Andrew was the most entitled and least intelligent of the Queen's sons. Even her detractors appeared to agree for once. All the warning indicators were present. Entitledness, irritability, poisonous friendships, and careless spending. However, nobody stopped him. Andrew went farther into the shadows, shielded from the consequences by his mother's unshakable devotion, until Epstein's world fell apart and he was pulled along with it. At that point, the prince was viewed by the world as something much darker than a pampered royal. In addition to ruining Andrew's reputation, the ensuing controversy would permanently splinter his position within the royal family. 2010 was the pivotal year. For soliciting from a juvenile, Jeffrey Epstein had recently been released from prison. Most powerful men fled from him. Andrew took the opposite action. He and Epstein were seen laughing as they strolled around Central Park, seemingly unaware of the scandal. That one picture exploded like a bomb. The public witnessed the Queen's son strolling beside a convicted sexual offender for the first time. Virginia followed. Her name burst into the public domain in 2015. She said that Andrew was one among the guys she was coerced into seeing and that Epstein had trafficked her when she was a teenager. She told of 3 encounters with him. Every time she claimed that Epstein's partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, had made the arrangements. The snapshot was the most incriminating piece. Andrew holding a 17-year-old Joie in his arm. In the background, Ghislaine is grinning. Denial was Andrew's answer. "I never met her," he said. Experts looked at the photo and discovered no evidence of alteration, despite his suggestion that it was a fake. He appeared much more desperate because of the denial. The castle went into a panic. They attempted to protect him for years by making evasive claims and depending on the Queen's power to stifle dissent. However, the evidence continued to mount. Andrew was traveling with Epstein, according to flight data. Witnesses reported seeing them together in the Caribbean, New York, and London. The royal facade was pierced by every detail. By 2019, the strain had become unbearable. In an attempt to clear his name, Andrew consented to participate in a BBC interview. One of the most disastrous interviews in royal history ensued. It started with such ridiculous justifications that he became a worldwide joke. He asserted that he had actually been at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter the night Geoffrey claimed to have met him at a nightclub in London. Ignorant of the absurdity of the detail, he repeated it as if it were a concrete alibi. Memes went viral on the internet, transforming a grave accusation into a farce. The sweaty comment followed. According to Jew, Andrew was perspiring profusely while dancing with her. Andrew retorted that he was unable to perspire at the time due to a medical problem. His credibility was immediately damaged by the strangeness and impossibility of the excuse. Denial was no longer enough. It was a delusion. His tone, however, was the worst part. Rather than show compassion for Epstein's victims, Andrew put himself first. It was convenient, he added, to remain with Epstein following his discharge. He referred to it as a mistake, but he swiftly clarified that it was beneficial because it allowed him to personally break off their friendship. Millions of onlookers thought he was justifying his proximity to a predator. The reaction was instantaneous. The interview was described as a catastrophe, a train accident, or a vehicle collision. This time, not even the Queen could keep him safe. Days later, Andrew declared he was leaving his royal responsibilities. It was a banishment. A high-ranking royal was essentially exiled for scandal for the first time in contemporary history. There was more harm to come. He was cut off from charities. His honorary positions were revoked by universities. He was kicked out of military groups. Once the Queen's favorite son, Andrew had turned into a guy who was poisonous to all of the monarchy's institutions. Nevertheless, Ju pushed on. She accused Andrew of sexual assault in a civil complaint she filed in the U.S. in 2021. By claiming she had no case, that he was shielded by technicalities, and that the charges were untrue. Andrew's attorneys made every effort to have it dropped. Nothing was successful. The matter could proceed to trial, the court decided. That meant one thing to Andrew. He would either reach a private settlement or go to court against Joffrey. Andrew settled in the beginning of 2022. He reportedly paid Joffrey £12 million. The public perceived it differently, despite the palace's insistence that it wasn't an admission of guilt. It appeared to many that he had purchased his release from responsibility. Even worse, rumors circulated about the source of the funds. Some believed that in order to preserve the monarchy, the Queen herself had covertly financed the transaction. Andrew was by himself by the time of Prince Philip's funeral, lagging after his siblings. He was expelled from the balcony for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. He stood clumsily while his siblings donned their military uniforms at her funeral after being divested of his own. Every moment was a response to the prayers of everyone he hurt. It wasn't that. All honorary military titles were taken away from Andrew the moment Charles came to power. He was informed that he would no longer hold any formal position representing the crown. Royal life's doors were slammed shut. He had to defend himself like a regular citizen after even his security detail was demoted. It was an unimaginable disgrace to Andrew. In order to protect the monarchy, Charles saw it as essential surgery to remove the infection. The rupture became apparent at the 2023 coronation. Every moment of Andrew's humiliation was caught on camera. He showed there wearing the simple suit of a marginalized relative rather than a uniform or ceremonial robes. Wearing badges of power, his siblings moved with determination. Andrew's face was a mask of repressed rage as he stumbled clumsily. Experts in body language observed the distance between him and the other family members. William avoided making eye contact, and Charles hardly noticed him. The way Harry appeared more accepted than the disgraced Duke, despite his personal scandals. He was secluded at other times as well. The fracture was once more captured on video during the Easter service that year. While Andrew trailed behind and was disregarded even by his own nieces and nephews, Charles and William strode forward and interacted with the audience. Every look and every motion conveyed the narrative. The ghost of the royal family was now Andrew. Exile from the public eye did not, however, stop the leaks of private life. The public now despises him even more as more employees come out with memories. According to one, Andrew would leave laundry mounds strewn all over his chambers, expecting staff to tidy things without protest. According to another, he demanded baths be made at certain temperatures and would yell at employees if the water wasn't measured to his preference. One valet remembered being told to use an iron to flatten Andrew's shoelaces. Although the details sounded ridiculous, they showed a man who was enamored with entitlement and disengaged from typical human conduct.